Welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Arts lecture series hosted here in the Hall of Philosophy in Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania. Mount Gretna School of Art, real quick for anybody that's not familiar, is a 7-week summer pressure cooker for painting outside and connecting with nature. We attract students from across the country and occasionally internationally. I'd like to also thank Stinson Strout for his support of the lecture series this summer, and Purpose One, who's always been like a really great supporter of ours out of Harrisburg. I'd like to also thank Garrett Moore, who went here a long time ago, maybe 2015. He served as a board member for 6 years, lent us this fancy mic system so that we sound better this year. So thank you, Garrett, who is at work today. I'm going to introduce Maggie King-Johns and Quinn McNichol, both alumni of the school from previous years, but they've gone on to grad school and are doing their post-grad school lives as early career artists. So they came back, and our students, we built this idea into the program with the 4 Pillars Artists Residency for our alumni who feel connected to Mount Gretna and want to be a part of things again. Where they can come back and be an artist for 4 weeks, where we give them a studio in one of our artist cottages and make an effort to promote them to our audience through this artist talk and try to get them pop-up shows of their work and other things. They're going to give a workshop next weekend. Yeah, so it's really fun to have both of them back. We're going to start with Maggie King-Johns. She had her education at Boston University for her MFA, great painting program there, and University of Virginia for her Bachelor's of Arts with distinction in studio art. She's done residencies Mount Gretna and Chautauqua School of Art, which our program's modeled after, the one near Jamestown, New York. And a couple recent group shows that she's been in is A Secret Theater at the Greenhouse Gallery in Brooklyn, and another show titled Male in Olympia, New York. And I'm gonna ask Maggie to come up and everybody clap.
Hi everybody, as Jay said, I'm one of four Pillars art residents for 2024 here at Mount Gretna. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. But I'm based right now in Washington, DC. Just to give you guys a background on my educational history, I definitely come from a perceptual painting background. As Jay said, I've spent many summers here, studied at Chautauqua School of Art with Stanley Lewis, and my undergrad program at UVA was very based in observational painting. So these are just 2 examples of what my work used to look like. So on the left is a landscape I did here at Mount Gretna with Stephanie Pierce as the lead painting teacher. And then on the right is what my work looked like in undergrad. This was a part of my thesis show where I made a series of kind of monumental figurative paintings of women. Okay, so this is fast forwarding a few years. Obviously my work looks different now than it did then, but I just want to say from doing this, putting together this presentation, I've realized that there's a through line, which is my interest in perception, the push and pull of space, and how the genres of landscape painting and figurative painting relate to my identity. So these are 2 of the first paintings I did in graduate school at Boston University. I became interested at the time of pairing abstracted landscapes with didactic forms of visual language, meaning if you look at an image or an object, it's supposed to tell you something or teach you something. So these are they look like weather maps almost, and they have like a little key at the bottom of the top with the colors. And at the time, I was thinking about distilling stages of my life into distinct color palettes, which is kind of a funny exercise, but it's kind of the way I think about my work. So in a sense, I kind of think of these paintings as I think of these paintings as self-portraits in the form of abstracted landscapes. I was always also experimenting with surface. So these are kind of like thick acrylic and oil paint, painted on this kind of textured jersey bed sheet. This was around the same time, and thinking more about making work that was slightly dimensional. So this painting is, the surface is built up with paper pulp, and then I painted it with oil and acrylic. And this is the first painting I used reflective glass powder in. So it's kind of hard to tell from a still photo, but this is the same glass powder that they use with like crosswalks. So this painting is very reflective. So depending on how the light hits it, it shifts a lot. And I thought that I was a genius and I was the first person to use crosswalk powder in a painting, but that is not true. There's an artist named Mary Corse who makes beautiful paintings associated with the light and space movement in the 1970s, mostly in California, but this is paintings from 2019. I then make these larger paintings that are also use the glass powder and interference paint that are based on game interfaces. They kind of use a heads-up display as a visual device to represent like a state of mind or like a way of thinking. So I was kind of searching for this relationship between abstraction, information, and identity. Here's another painting from that series. This is about 4 feet by 5 feet. And similar to the last one, it's based on like a multiplayer game perspective. It's based on Mario Kart, if you guys played that as kids. And I was thinking about the way that different motifs are used both in popular culture and in like early Renaissance painting or in religious imagery. So like thinking about rainbows, for example, or even fruit. So I was thinking of this way that games and religion are both stratified into these kinds of levels. At least that's what I was thinking of internally. So I was thinking a lot about this painting, which is actually the Met. So if you guys go to New York, you should go see it. It's kind of in like this little room next to the rotunda, tucked away. And this is an early Renaissance painting from 1445 by Giovanni di Paolo. And I just love how like oftentimes abstraction is used in early Renaissance painting to describe like otherworldly phenomena. So this is kind of like the fallen world, the barren wasteland that the angels rolling in. I guess I forgot to mention with this one, I was kind of thinking of like, with a landscape, like there could be like a sequential time thing. So kind of these point of views, game player and representing like time passing. This was the last really large painting I did in grad school. It's 2 feet by 7 feet. It's called Night Flowers. This is also like the most three-dimensional painting I'd done at the time. So it's built up with paper pulp again, and then painted with a combination of cellulose paint, which is very matte, and like acrylic paint mixed with pouring medium. So it's very shiny. So I was thinking about the feeling of being on display as a woman and walking home from my studio in the summer in Boston. All of these kind of lights from people's houses were lighting up these flowers, and it reminded me of this feeling. So if you look closely at this painting, you can see a face. There's like eyes that are wide set at the top, and then in the middle, there's like a weird mouth and nose. So it's kind of about this feeling of like being watched and like looking back. My paintings are really hard to tell what the surface is like from photos, so this is a close-up, so you can see what the surface looks like. So the next few slides are out of order chronologically, but I thought it just made more sense to talk about it this way. So this painting, the top of it, which is that was zoomed in, those rectangles are the sizes of standard postcards. And then I dripped plaster to kind of make these fleshy blobs, for lack of a better word. And then it's painted with gouache and I think some acrylic. But I, on purpose, tried to make this ink that looked like dried blood and to make something abject, almost like luminous. This was after, like, coincided with my car getting broken into, which I have like mint green seats. And so it would be like bled on my seats, those like little finger marks. And so before I put on like intense gloves and like cleaned it very thoroughly. I was kind of angry, but then I kind of thought it was like the color combination looked really pretty. So I was just thinking about like the visual languages of maps and landscape in relation to like an abstract representation of the body. This was a big departure at the time and something that it took me a really long time to like integrate into my work. But this was during the pandemic. I was in my like last couple months of grad school, couldn't make big sexy paintings anymore. So I was back in Birmingham, and I had all these perfume bottles that were my grandmother's, who passed away about 20 years ago. And I decided to make molds of the perfume bottles and then basically like cast them in colored water that would freeze in layers. So these are all made of ice. And then I made these kind of like videos of me melting and like staining my hands. I don't think the videos worked super well, but I really like the sculptures. And I was thinking about the genre of vanitas and impermanence, and how like familial expectations around gender roles are passed down. I made a series of cast plaster shells based on this Piero della Francesca Brera Madonna from 1474. So if you see at the top where the shell and the egg is, that's kind of what this painting is based on. So the symbolism is kind of debated, but it's generally seen as the shell in Greek culture. Previous to Christianity, the shell was seen as a symbol of a womb. And the ostrich egg or pearl is kind of seen as a symbol of fertility. So I was kind of interested in Mary as an archetype for a woman whose body's on display, but she has kind of like little agency over her fertility. I look a lot at Renaissance painting, one, because it's didactic, and especially before people could read, they would literally learn about religion from looking at these altar pieces. And then also my personal history. I grew up in a very conservative Christian church in Alabama. So a lot of my work is kind of unpacking that and how it affected my relationship with my own body. But I also like comparing and contrasting these two representations of the Virgin Mary. On the left is Jean Fouquet, Virgin and Child from 1450. And on the right is Fra Angelico Annunciation from 1445. So I'm reading a book about representations of Mary right now, but in the book they pointed out that Mary is both represented as an object of desire, kind of like on the painting to the left, and then also as a symbol of modesty and obedience. After grad school, I think sometimes you can get a little confused and not really know. Grad school is kind of about like taking you apart a little bit and like making you question everything. So it can take some time to put yourself back together. So I was teaching full time. This was still during the pandemic. It's living in like a new place where I didn't know that many people from my partner's job. And I just decided to start making drawings out of kitchen string and Elmer's glue. So that is what I did for a while. So I made a bunch of these drawings on the left. And I kind of saw them both as like abstracted, almost like kneeling or praying figures, and as it kind of reminded me of like racetracks that you would see in those video games, or even like vintage board games. And then after I did this, I decided to make them into borax crystal sculptures, which it sounds more complicated than it is. I made like an armature out of wire in the same shape as the drawing. And then I'll just wrap it in string and then submerge it in a super saturated solution, which is kind of like the same as making rock candy. And borax is just a type of soap. So I made a ton of these. So these are two of them. I decided that the crystal sculptures weren't really standalone sculptures. They were more like an element. So I decided to make altar-like reliefs out of polystyrene foam to encase the crystals. And so I was thinking about the game Operation, and then reliquaries where you can see body parts. So that's the finger of Saint Nicholas. And I look at a lot of toys and games, because I kind of see them also as didactic, since I think play is a type of practice for adult life. Like maybe this could be like practice for being a doctor. This was a smaller version I made to kind of get the hang of carving the foam. So this is about 3 feet by 3 feet. And then this is the drawing for the first large one. So the crystals would go in little alcoves, those shapes at the bottom. So this is 6 feet by 6 feet. I was also thinking of these play makeup palettes that they made like in the 90s when I was a kid. Both like formally in terms of it being like a shape with these blobby shapes with this kind of like wand. But also about the idea of having a play makeup thing for like a little girl. She's too young to wear makeup, and like preparing perhaps her for like beauty standards of adolescence. So this is that same thing, 3-dimensional. And so you can see the crystals go at the bottom. They're not like inset yet. And then this is on the right how it is now. So I haven't finished it yet. And it's hard coated with aqua resin, which is a water-based plaster system. So the crystals will go at the bottom, those little alcoves, and then it'll be painted in colored plaster. While making these large sculptures, I embraced a different kind of approach and pace to my work. I was kind of modeling my practice after Jay DeFeo, who was an artist working in the Bay Area in the 60s. She worked on this painting called The Rose, which is on the right. It's like mounds of kind of sculptural oil paint for 8 years. And then there's this great video of them trying to take it out of her apartment. I think they had to cut out like a wall. And it weighed like something, an insane amount. It's at the Wiki right now. It's not up all the time, but I've seen it there. But just in the fact that I was giving myself permission to work on something for a really long time and like dedicate myself to something. Here's the second one. And I was thinking about like how the crystals worked as both intestines, maybe in the first one, or like operation, but also as figures. So these kind of like figures watching this other kind of abstracted figure. Here is almost all the way hard coded. And then something I've been thinking a lot about for that work and the work I'm making now, which is in the same body of work, is these kind of figures that represent aesthetic ideals or moral ideals, like similar to the Virgin Mary. So on the left is the Aphrodite of Knidos, and this was the first life-size female nude in Greek history from the 4th century BC. And then these two on the right are called Paleolithic Venuses, and they're the middle one's from 25,000 years ago, and the one on the right is from 41,000 years ago. So I like thinking about how these representations of women represent attitudes surrounding women's bodies. So I kind of like that the Aphrodite is both presented as a object of desire, but she has a kind of gesture of modesty, whereas the Paleolithic Venuses are very frank in their voluptuousness. And I think even the name Paleolithic Venus kind of points to the tension between the two representations. They have that name because an amateur French archaeologist discovered one of the earliest ones and decided to name it the Immodest Venus. Here's some formal kind of influences I've been thinking about. This is Tishon Su on the left. He makes these like wild sculptural reliefs that are painted and sculptures. And then on the right is Elizabeth Murray, who makes these like very large shaped paintings. I had to kind of skip around. I'm working more in these distinct bodies of work, but this is actually from like the body of work I'm going to do after the one I'm working on now. And often the content of my work is based on the color palette. I feel like color really guides my work a lot. So with the flower altars, they're all going to be white and pastel. So I was thinking about these ideas of purity and virginity. And then for these, they're all like the opposite, like super bright, almost out of the tube colors. And they're shaped paintings around these replicas of toys that I found in the thrift store. So for this work, I was thinking more about the ideas of home, childhood, motherhood, and kind of like the didactic nature of toys, which I've talked a little bit about with my work. I guess the last thing I want to say is I've never taken a sculpture class like ever in my life. I completely taught myself all of these things from YouTube videos. There's like a prop building textbook that's great. If you guys are interested, I can tell you what the name of it is. Just to say that like if there's any direction that you want to go in with your work, even if you're out of school, don't be afraid just to teach yourself. You'll get there eventually. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Great. Wonderful. Okay, I would like to now introduce Quinn McNichol, who grew up in Glenside, Pennsylvania, earned her BFA from Pennsylvania College of Art Design in 2012, and recently completed their MFA at University of Washington, Seattle. And I noticed on your online bio, you mentioned several residencies. Take extra care to say, being a student and resident at Mount Gretna School of Art over several summers was exceptionally influential to their creative discipline and practice, as was the course they took in Philadelphia about growing and utilizing medicinal herbs. And one thing to know about Quinn is that the intimate connection to nature, when they got here, growing around us outside of the studio walls, some sort of very earthy connection to the landscape and nature. Verdant, that's another word I wanted to use. Also participated in the EAR residence program at Millersville University, the Chautauqua Institution's School of Art, the Vermont Studio Center. They painted murals for the Philadelphia Folk Festival over the past 10 years. Are you painting another one this year? Potentially. Most recently, a resident at El Sur in La Habana, Mexico. Wonder Domes in Wonder Valley, California, and currently member of Soil, artist-run gallery. Everybody welcome Quinn.
Hey everybody, it's such a pleasure to be here at Mount Gretna again. I've been here a countless number of times, I guess I can count them, but I don't feel like it. It's great to be around mentors and friends and also new faces. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just myself and who I am, and that's going to lead us all into my work and the progression of my work. So my name is Quinn, and my pronouns are they, them. So I identify as non-binary, and what that means for me is that instead of feeling male or female, I find myself floating in the category of non-gender and disillusioned with the binary options of gender that I grew up with. And similarly, I have strong impulses to move outside of the four edges of the picture plane. So although I make a lot of paintings and deeply appreciate the world of painting, I find that I identify more as an artist specifically than as a painter. I was raised in an Irish Catholic family just north of Philadelphia, and although the religion part of it never made any sense to me, I developed a deep appreciation for the aesthetic and ritual of having an altar, of expressing gratitude for spirits and plants, and I am increasingly curious about my Irish heritage. As Jay mentioned, I love gardening, specifically with flowering perennial medicinal herbs, and this is an image of my garden growing in midsummer in Seattle. I use these plants to make them into herbal remedies, such as tinctures, salves, and teas, remedies for my own ailments, and most days, I pull a tarot card as part of my morning ritual. The myths, numerology, and astrological associations with these images often create a subtle magical filter through which I experience my day unfolding. I drove here to Mount Gretna from Seattle in my little blue truck, and I am very grateful for the freedom I have to travel slowly, to take in the world in tiny pieces at a time. And I strongly believe in the sentiment of it being about the journey and the destination, both in my travels and in my creative practice. So I made this painting in 2011, a still life of beautiful objects, actually from an assignment in Jay's painting class my senior year of college. I loved making this painting, finding the relationships between shapes and mixing colors until I found the perfect match. But when I finished it, I realized I needed more from this painting and from this experience. So I took a journey. I stepped further away from the still life and made this painting of the whole room, from my gaze over my left shoulder as I painted, all the way out to the furthest thing I could see out the window, with the still life nestled in the middle of the whole thing. And then I put that painting in front of a mirror, and I made a painting of myself painting a painting I had already painted. Putting my figure into the work was, I think, subconsciously a way of examining the way I looked and presented myself as a human in the world. I felt infinite, separate. When I looked at myself like that, a figure placed between two reflections of the world, I felt infinite and separate from any identifiers. There was a sense of floating that reminds me of that moment just before falling asleep, halfway between awake and dreaming. And I found that I've been on a slow meandering journey of chasing that feeling in my creative practice. So in the years following undergrad, I worked in compartmentalized ways, making oil paintings on canvas from observation, trying my hardest to just get it right, which was a mantra, or Mercedes Matter, I really love, was saying. Her work was always about just getting it right. So this is a painting I actually did here in Mount Gretna a few years ago. I also worked closely with a mentor and healer who helped me turn my vision inwards and to examine what I was experiencing inside of myself on an energetic level. This painting is about how I see myself and how others see me. Over time, these two worlds began to merge, and I finally found myself in a place of being able to express visually the narrative of what was happening before me through the emotional lens through which I experienced it. I also moved away at that time from oil paint towards materials that I felt I could be more expressive with, mostly cut paper collage, acrylic paint, and dry materials such as graphite and colored pencils. This combination allowed me more experimentation and play, a more tangible way to work in layers of accumulated experiences. I moved from Pennsylvania to Seattle, Washington in 2019 for my grad school at University of Washington. And when I was there on the West Coast, away from everyone that I had ever known my entire life, I felt my body relax and let go of a lot of the tension I had realized I had been holding. I had access to two 15-foot square studios, and because of the COVID pandemic, I had more alone time than I had anticipated. At first, the pandemic made me obsessed with the news. Everyone was constantly seeking updates. We were all glued to TVs, radios, and phones. My world felt very small, and as a means of entertainment and escapism from the horrors of the real news, I started to write my own. Reports of mundane experiences and vivid dreams filled the pages of the daily sequence. And then I retreated further in. Inside the safe container of my studio, I created my own world, an idea that developed for me after reading Jose Munoz, an academic and queer theorist, who imagined queerness as existing in a state of potentiality, in the dreamlike anticipation of utopia. In this imagined utopia, I could exist however I wanted or needed to. In the hours I spent in that room, I leaned into romanticized narratives of things as simple as the rain, the sun, a walk in the woods, a folk tune playing on the radio. And I both processed and decompressed from the pain that was violently swirling around the outside world. I was inside of these rooms for so long that my body left an impression on the wall and on the blank canvases I brought in there. There was one of me working in the garden, my Irish ancestors quietly watching from afar as I transplanted mugwort. There was one of me in my dreams where I imagined that I craft with clay the tarot cards that I pull every morning. And then there was one of me moving dazedly between the worlds of waking and dreaming, between rain and sun, between masculine and feminine, and between two plants, one who promotes bleeding, the other who stops it. This painting is called Concrete World Full of Souls, which is a line from the Bob Dylan song, 3 Angels, which documents his first steps back into the world after a near-death motorcycle accident. I've been told that my mother heard my dad playing this song at an open mic, and that's how their relationship began. So I consider it my origin story. And I often feel the presence of these 3 angels hanging above me. After grad school, I found alternative places to make art. I began to travel to the Mojave Desert in Southern California to a small town called Wonder Valley. And there I had access to a giant pile of materials with which I grew my own kind of medicinal herb garden, one that would survive in the heat and dryness of the high desert. And where I also started playing music with an eccentric band called Stage Fright, led by an eccentric character named Lolly Goodwoman. I traveled to Mexico for several months, and I was a resident at El Sur Artist Residency in Mexico City. And in this beautiful studio, I daydreamed about my garden in Seattle and what I would grow in a garden if I planted it where I was in Mexico. I thought about the image of Mary, who watches over every garden I saw in Mexico. And I thought too about the old nursery rhyme, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? I made a parallel for myself that Mary being contrary meant she was queer. And so I started to research native plants from Mexico. I found 19 medicinal and magical herbs to arrange in my conceptual garden. I wanted to thank the plants for their energy, so I created an altar to them. I offered visitors a cup of tea from the plants in my garden, promoting them to sit and stay a while, to lounge on comfortable cushions and take pleasure in the garden grown under the watch of a contrary Mary, whose figure I illustrated on the opposite side of my fictional garden, looking out into the living garden, collecting prayers for the sinners of the world. I had driven in a circle around the US in my little blue truck, a journey that was largely fueled by pulling the Wheel of Fortune card on multiple occasions on my tarot deck. The Wheel of Fortune represents the calendar wheel and the cyclical nature of time and change. In this card, the wheel is divided into 12 sections, each corresponding to a sign of the zodiac. As the wheel turns, it cycles through highs and lows, moving through the collective universal destiny. The Wheel of Fortune reminds us to surrender to the flow and to see what can be found on the journey. I had an opportunity to make an installation at the Coffin Farm, which is an artist residency just outside of Seattle. I designed a garden that would mimic the Wheel of Fortune, choosing 12 plants, one for each sign of the zodiac, referencing both Irish herbalism and multiple other sources of folklore and herbalism. I created the wheel from recycled fabric collected over the years, including clothes I had worn as far back as my teenage years. Amidst the garden slides a snake silently on the ground, shifting from his previous self, leaving old skin behind, moving slowly towards change. The journey I had taken was transformative. Multiple skins were shed, and I returned back to Seattle more comfortable in myself and in my body than I had ever before experienced. I started to make small paintings of the plants in this garden to document their own growth and change. I do return to oil paint as seen in the figure paintings earlier, and my studio practice right now maintains a balance of multiple mediums. I'm often trying to find the appropriate match for each story that I have to tell. When winter set in last year and the plants went into hibernation, I created an image of the astrological herb garden, taking it back to a place of concept and design. It was a depiction of the garden from an aerial perspective, perhaps from the vantage point of my angels and ancestors. And also, it served visually as a Wheel of Fortune tarot card of my own design. I traveled back to Wonder Valley last winter, and in addition to tending to my garden there and engaging in even more eccentric musical productions, I painted my friend's front yard rug, mainly to preserve it from deteriorating in the sun, but it was also another opportunity to grow a garden. When I traveled back to Seattle, it was January. I had loved the trip so much, I created a stream of consciousness painting, memorializing the whole thing. It's pretty detailed, so here's some close-up snippets of it, little moments. It was deep winter, and I was preparing for a small solo show at Soil, which is the artist-run gallery I've been a member of since 2021. Winter for me is so bleak that I often retreat deep into my internal world, trying my best to bring dreams into my waking life. This show that I had is called Or Was It All Some Kind of Dream? And you entered the space through another show, which was a group show in the front space of the gallery of artists from Portland called Sleepless Nights, which was all about insomnia and doom scrolling. So the pairing of these shows was delightful. But after walking through the intentionally high anxiety stimulating space, you passed through a silver curtain into my show. To both your left and right were small altars, and the soft sounds of Irish singer Enya filled the air. And the image of a whale tail hangs high, just like it did above my mother's bed from when I was a child. I often imagined the tail as a crow flying above me. My astrological herb garden continues to thrive with the support of grow lights, and the snake has increased dramatically in size. Above the snake fly the three angels from my origin story. My memory of the desert is illuminated by the strong desert sun, and the floor is painted like the carpet at my friend's Wonder Valley home. Everything is silver, the curtains, the walls covered in silver fabric, the snake and pillows made of this fabric too. Silver is the color of dreaming. Visitors come inside out of the cold, dark, and pain of this Seattle winter, and for a while, they rest on soft silver cushions to meander through dreams, books, tarot cards, and sounds. And they imagine themselves in a utopian future where they can exist freely as themselves, however they want to be. So here in Mount Gretna for a month, I'm able to soak in the green and the sweetness of my favorite season, which is summer. And currently in the studio, I'm designing another herb garden of Irish medicinal and magical herbs. There's a myth that there are 7 of these Irish herbs that nothing natural or supernatural can harm. So that feels really special. As Jay said, I'm growing a small garden outside of the studio, painting it as it grows. And I imagine that when I'm back in Seattle, the memories of this summer will keep me warm again through the winter months, that these gardens will continue to grow in ways that promote another journey, which takes me closer to the queer utopia of my potential future. That's it.
I have two for both of you. Maggie, do you ever make cast jewelry? And Quinn, do you ever design your own tarot card pack?
You asked about if I ever make jewelry, cast jewelry. I have a bunch of beads and rocks, so I am interested in that kind of like adornment that you see with jewelry. And I do make jewelry as a hobby, but I've never cast it. But I definitely think about those kind of like materials a lot of rocks and semi-precious stones and kind of the like reliquary look of adornment.
Yes, I draw tarot cards often. There's 78 cards in a deck, and I keep starting and then having a new idea, and then I keep stopping. And I have a dear friend and mentor here who we are going back and forth trying to create one together. So if you wait about 20 years, we're gonna come out with a tarot deck.
Hi, this question's for Maggie. You were talking about a book with about representations of Mary. I wanted to know what that book was called if you.
Okay, it has a very naughty name, so I didn't come up with it. I'm sorry, but it's like an academic book, but it's called Virgin Horror. So it's about representations of Mary in medieval times and how that basically influenced female characters and like Chaucer's in like literature, basically.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. Question for Quinn. You mentioned your response to winter. Is that regardless of where you are? Did you spend winter in Mexico? Did your response there change from your winters in Philadelphia? And maybe some thoughts on that whole, on your winter experience.
Yeah, I spent a year last year avoiding winter. The circle that I drove around the US was like winter was chasing me. And when I was in the residency in Mexico, like half the reason I did it was I was like, February, I'm going to Mexico. And one of the things that really draws me to Wonder Valley in Southern California is the sunshine. And that's why I spent last winter there, and I'm gonna try really hard to go there this winter. There are a lot of like herbal herbs to take to uplift spirits. But I'm just like, I'm a naturally cold person, and I always hated the winter growing up in Pennsylvania. And I thought moving to Seattle, the winter would get better, but it just like was kind of bad in a different way. So I avoid winter really hard. The studio offers some respite from that, but I kind of try to chase the sun.
I very much appreciated hearing both of your presentations. They were great. I have a question really for both of you. You've both started with like a foundation in painting, oil painting, and you've moved into very different realms of creativity. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how those earlier years in painting, how they fed or prepared, nourished the directions and the kinds of ways you create now.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jordan. I guess, let's see, how do I even start? I think the way that I think about space is very influenced by perceptual painting, and especially Brian Rago, who taught here in 2015. I think like that kind of plasticity and how that relates to color, I still think about a lot. And then in terms of that kind of like went into more of a way that I understand material in terms of space and color, meaning like a shiny blue versus a matte blue and what the light does to the spatial dynamics. So I haven't painted those giant things, but they will be painted. And so that I still think about painting a lot. It's just kind of been on the back burner of these kind of more like sculptural material things. But I would say, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, so I also started so much as a painter, and for me, the practice of painting was really rooted in intense observation. So looking at the world and documenting it to the best of my ability, what I saw. And I realized that the more I looked, the more I was seeing. And that's when, the edges of the picture plane felt, at first they felt so expansive, but then at some point they felt really limiting, because I realized like, yes, I was seeing, but I was also feeling, I was thinking, I was experiencing. That's sort of what led me to this, internal search. And I feel like when I went deep in, when I was coming back out, I was able to see in a more holistic kind of way. I didn't put a lot of my like influences in this talk. I just, sometimes it like takes me on a whole different like track that it's like hard to get back on, but I mean, I love painting. I still look at a lot of painters and have a lot of reverence for the world of painting, and I'll go to a museum and just like jaw drop over all the paintings. So I haven't rejected it, but I'm also really grateful for what it taught me and the journey that it sparked me on.
How long did it take you to drive from Washington to here?
By the map, it's 50 hours, but I broke it up into about 10 days with a long layover in South Dakota.
Maggie, the title of the book, for prop building, since we're talking about books.
I can't remember this is exactly the title. I thought I had it written down, but it's basically on Amazon, if you Google prop building for theater, film, and TV. So it goes through common materials that are used, like safety precautions that go along with that. Because if you're building sculptures like this, you basically are trying to make large props. So it's very helpful.
This was sort of touched on when you were talking about avoiding the winter, but I'm curious for both of you, you've both mentioned tangentially moving or going to residencies, and I'm interested in specifically how sense of place enters the work, especially for artists who were based in observational painting at the start, looking at what's around you. When you, for example, when you moved to DC or when to Seattle, like how did the work change and what relationship does your work have to place?
Thanks for that, Liam. Something I think about a lot is I think that artists' work looks best in their studios, just kind of a hot take, but I think that I kind of make work for studio spaces. So I live in DC. Wasn't something necessarily I was thinking about, but it's obviously where government monuments are. So I'm making these giant white monuments, basically. I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but also my studio's, it's an old barn. It's out of DC by about 45 minutes. I was kind of thinking about these kind of the materials I was using, like crystal and plaster, and kind of like almost making things that look like they're dug up. And I think that has to do with that kind of old setting that I'm working in.
Yeah, I love that question. Well, first, felt very stuck in my childhood home, and I knew that if I followed art, it would take me places, and it absolutely has. I'm really sensitive to my surroundings. Like, I'm a reptile, I'm a snake, I'm a chameleon. Like, I feel like I am where I am. So in Mount Gretna, my paintings are so green, right? When I lived for a time in the city in Philly, I was like on a really big, busy street on Girard Ave. All my paintings were like neon colors and like text started to come in. When I moved to Seattle, rain happened on all the stuff. Like there was rain came into my studio visually, and when I was in the desert, it's just everything felt dusty and dry and kind of sunlit. So I feel very sensitive and reactive to my surroundings, and I think I'm just going to keep changing as the places around me change. And I'm really grateful for having moved to different places, and I think it's what has helped my work be so mutable.
And as a follow-up to that, do the places like come with you? When you leave Mexico, there's a bit of Mexico stay in the thing.
Yeah, I think a little bit.
Maggie, you talked about how grad school sort of broke you apart, and then after that you had to find how to put yourself back together as an artist. Can you talk about what that looked like a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very common for people to say that. Like before grad school, I would listen to artist lectures and they would say, it took me a few years to process grad school. And I would always think, what do they mean by that? And now I know. But I think Heidi, one time I was talking to her, and she was saying, just find a way to keep going when you don't know what to do, or if like, you know, work is interfering or life's interfering. And so just finding a way back to something like extremely low stakes and basic, I think is what helped me move forward. So just like the string drawings in my kitchen, just, I think returning to drawing always helps, but I think like there's a false narrative in grad school, but it makes sense why they do this, but it's like that you're supposed to have everything figured out by the time you graduate. But to me, it's just, that's like the beginning of that journey that you go on, you know, really by yourself, or with a community. In grad school, you kind of have to delve into the reasons behind what you're doing. And then sometimes you realize you're doing things just because you think you have to do them and not because you actually really need to do them.
This makes sense to me. Thank you.